Today I'm going to be talking about two study materials that I've been using to learn Korean, and that is the elementary Korean textbook as well as the elementary Korean workbook. Both items I've been using to study Korean at the moment. With the textbook and the textbook and workbook are sold separately, so I have bought them both. You can buy one or the other, though I would recommend getting both, which I will talk about later on in the video. So what I'll talk about first is the textbook. So the textbook is divided into 15 lessons, and 2 out of those 15 lessons are review chapters. So there's a chapter that comes in the middle, so you can revise things that you've learnt at the first half of the book, and then there is a review as the final chapter, so you can review the things that you've learnt so far. This textbook, the elementary Korean textbook, is in a series of Korean textbooks. So elementary Korean is the first one. Then there's continuing Korean, and then I think advanced Korean after that. The first 4 lessons in the elementary Korean textbook, I skipped the first 4 because I had started learning Korean using the Complete Korean book, which is a totally separate study resource, but I have reviewed that, so I can link that also in this video, so you can check that out. That book, the Complete Korean book, is the first book that I have used to study Korean. This one for me is the second. So I skipped the first 4 chapters just because the first 4 chapters in elementary Korean were purely about Hangul, like the pronunciation. It was about very basic expressions like thank you, stuff like that, that I had already covered previously. So for me, there wasn't really a point to using those 4 chapters, so I skipped them. But of course, if you are a complete beginner and you're using the elementary Korean textbook as your first textbook, then you must do the first 4 chapters. Now I'm going to go through how each lesson is divided, because each lesson, each chapter is divided in the exact same way. They start off with some Korean dialogues. So here you can see this is dialogue 1, and they have usually around 2 to 4. So here they have 4 sets of dialogues. And as you can see in each dialogue, there is a picture always accompanying it. So here there's a text bubble that has the number, and that correlates to where that dialogue is coming from. So you can kind of paint a bit of a picture if you're being a bit overwhelmed with just the text by itself. After each written dialogue, so you can notice after, there are notes for the new maybe vocab or grammar points that they're gonna introduce within the chapter. So you see here, this is dialogue 2, and then underneath they have the notes for that, and that's for each of them. The written transcript of the dialogue, they have an accompanying audio. I did find the dialogue in this book to be much faster than what I was previously used to. In the Complete Korean book, they talked at a slower pace, so that was really good as a beginner, just to get used to hearing in a slower manner. This one, once I jumped to this one, I was very overwhelmed. I was like, oh my gosh, they're talking so fast, it's hard to keep up. But after a while, once you keep practicing and you get used to it, it does become easier. After the dialogue section, then there is vocabulary that they give you for the chapter, and the vocabulary is usually divided by a topic or thing. So here they've divided it by countries, languages, nationalities. Here's people and places. Then here they've divided it as things, and that's how they usually divide it. And there is about, on this chapter, 1, 2, 3 pages of vocabulary. That is a lot to take in. I know as a learner, you're definitely 100%, unless you're like, you can memorize very well, you're not going to memorize every single bit of vocab that they give you, because some of the things, honestly, I don't think would come up that much in conversation, for myself personally anyway. I think if you just start off learning the basics, like what you need to know, and then building upon that, then it'll become much easier, because 3 pages of vocabulary per chapter is a bit much. After the vocabulary section in each chapter, they have lesson notes. So here you see lesson notes. It's divided by grammatical concept, which I find is really good, because then obviously your notes are much more organized when you're creating your own notes. They give quite lengthy explanations for some grammar points. I know for some of the time I found it very wordy. They give you so many examples, which I love. I think one thing that you do need in a textbook is a lot of examples. So for example, here in 6.1, talking about existence and location, they have got so many examples. So they've got 9 examples. So here being 1, and then all the way down here as 9. And within each lesson note, for some of them, they give you little bubbles, and they come up with like caution and pronunciation tip. So here, there you go, you can see caution, and then down here is the pronunciation tip. And these are really helpful because they make sure that you are definitely not making very simple and very crucial mistakes. It then has the exercises. So here you see exercises, and they're for a few pages. So 1, 2, 3 for this one. Sometimes it's a bit more, especially when you go later on into the book, they have much more exercise. The range of exercises, they are mainly more for grammar and writing, and they're much more at the sentence level of understanding. They are really good to solidify and practice the chapter's teachings, and they usually include things like grammar-specific exercises, completing sentences, translating from Korean to English and English to Korean, and as well as like vocabulary drills. So it's really good with that. They then also have the answers at the back so that you can self-correct. So it's kind of how like the answer key looks. So that is basically the Korean textbook. A fantastic resource, but I think you shouldn't use it by itself. And that's why I will be talking about also the Korean, elementary Korean workbook. Because I think, although it is sold separately, I think you should get it if you were to get the textbook as well. Just because the workbook allows you to practice listening and speaking skills, and practice more at like the dialogue level, at the conversational level, rather than just like one sentence at a time. It's more like passages and stuff like that. So it always starts off with a dialogue comprehension. So that is using the dialogue from the textbook. They then have, say, dialogue 1, and then they have 4 or 5 true or false statements. And having read the textbook, then you tick, oh, is that statement true or is that statement false? And it's really good because you have to read the statements also in Korean and in Korean script. And that's why you do need the textbook, because that one is based on a textbook reading. Then you have a grammar exercise. So for here it was about, so you can see here, it was about the past tense, so it's about like conjugating, So here you had to conjugate to the polite past and then also the honorific polite past. And I really like the table that they give you to fill out, because once you're done and once you've checked and you are correct, then that becomes a really great resource for you. Then they have other grammar points. So it's all divided by grammatical concepts. So here it's about the purposive form. Then here was expressing wishes and like what you want. Another kind of topic that came up in this chapter was like clothing and what you wear. So then they had activities about that topic. So it's like topic and grammatical concept. They have listening and speaking exercises. So here this was a listening speaking exercise, and they tell you at the bottom what to do with the dialogue for the listening exercise, then how to do it as a speaking exercise, and then what you can do to further extend yourself as a written exercise. They have a lot of, when doing listening activities, they have a lot of true, false, and also connecting activities. So here they have the grammatical concept of how to express wishes and wants, as it was shown before in the like written exercise. Now this one was a listening one. So you had to listen and say, okay, was that true or false? Do they do that? Do they want to do that or not? Then at the back, you double check your answers, because they have the answers at the back, which is really good. If you're self-studying, you do need those answers. Then here was talking about like people. So a person, they're going, so a person, a time of day, and what they were doing. And then they always have like a listening comprehension, which is usually about 10 different dialogues with 4 statements each, and they are all true false statements. Then they have a reading comprehension activity where they give you a whole passage in Korean, you read that, and then they have your questions in Korean, and then you respond in Korean. Then they always have useful expressions. So they have here a list of useful expressions and then a list of different scenarios kind of thing, and then you have to match to that scenario what useful expression you would use. And then the last activity in each chapter is a role play. So they give you a scenario, and then they kind of give you some questions that you could ask and some vocab or stuff that you might want to incorporate into your roleplay. Yeah, so I really love the workbook. I think it's a must if you are getting the textbook as well, because it just has so much practice, and the more you practice, the better it is, really. So yeah, that was my review on the elementary Korean textbook and workbook. I really enjoy these resources to study Korean. I think they're super helpful. So if you are a beginner, or maybe like an intermediate beginner, I would recommend the elementary Korean book. And yeah, if you are self-studying Korean, I think the elementary Korean textbook is another fantastic resource that you can use, and it is designed for self-studying. So yeah, that's my review. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you decide if this textbook and workbook are the right fit for you. Comment below if you have used, say, these textbooks before, or maybe if you have used other means of studying or other textbooks for learning a language. Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.